At my husband's funeral, I thought the hardest part was saying goodbye, but I was wrong. The hardest part was hearing the priest read a letter I didn't write, one signed in my handwriting, and realizing everyone believed it came from me. The church was quiet, except for the soft hum of the organ. I sat in the front pew, my hands gripping the edges of my black gloves. My husband, Thomas, lay in his casket just a few feet away. 43 years of marriage ended with a folded flag and whispered condolences. My son Daniel sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. His wife, Sophie, sat next to him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't shed a single tear since the service began. I told myself not to notice, not to judge. Grief wears many faces. When the priest stepped forward with a small, sealed envelope, he said it had been left by Thomas to be read aloud after his burial. My heart clenched. I didn't know he had written anything. I turned to Daniel, but he looked just as surprised. The priest opened the letter, unfolded the paper, and began to read. His voice trembled slightly. The letter spoke of regret, of a love betrayed, of a woman's apology for her sins. It described a man dying with forgiveness in his heart for the one who had lied to him for years. Then came the last line. With love, Margaret. That was my name. And the signature beneath it, it was mine. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I didn't write that, I said quietly, but my voice barely carried. Sophie leaned closer and whispered, just loud enough for the people behind us to hear, "Now you'll finally know the truth." Her words cut through me. Daniel turned to me, his brow furrowed. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that someone had forged my name, but the room had already made up its mind. I could feel their stares, some pitying, others disgusted. The priest closed the letter slowly, unaware of the chaos it had started. "Your husband wanted his heart to rest in truth," he said softly. "May he finally find peace." I sat frozen, my throat tight, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo inside my ears. That letter, whatever it was, had been written to destroy me. I turned to Sophie, but she only smiled faintly, like she had been waiting for this moment. As the service ended, I stayed seated, unable to move. Guests came to offer condolences, but I barely registered their words. Daniel tried to comfort me, but even he seemed uncertain now. By the time the casket was carried away, one thought kept circling in my mind. Someone wanted me to suffer, and they had used Thomas's death to do it. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next revealed a truth that almost tore my family apart. Before that funeral, my life had been quiet, simple, and built on routine. Thomas and I were married for over 40 years. We met when I was 19, a shy girl working in a diner, and he was a young man just back from the army. He was strong, polite, and dependable, the kind of man who fixed things instead of talking about them. I used to think that was love, stability. We built a home together in a small town just outside Chicago. He became a construction foreman. I worked as a school teacher until we had Daniel. We raised him in that house, watched him grow, and later watched him marry Sophie. Our lives weren't extraordinary, but they were steady until the last few years. Thomas changed after his retirement. He became distant, quiet, almost secretive. He spent more time in his study, writing or sorting through old papers. He'd say he was getting our affairs in order. But sometimes, when I walked past, I'd hear him talking softly on the phone, his tone sharp, not like him. When I asked, he'd brush it off. "Just bills, Margaret," he'd say. There were small moments when I felt his warmth again, his hand on mine during dinner, his faint smile when he watched Daniel play with our grandkids. But most nights, he'd stay up late, locked in his study. I learned not to ask questions. After 4 decades of marriage, you stop trying to dig into a man's silence. Then came the illness. At first, we thought it was just fatigue, but the doctors found something far worse. Thomas didn't have long, and for the first time in years, he seemed afraid. He asked to see Daniel more often. He asked Sophie to help with his medications. He started keeping a small wooden box beside his bed, something he wouldn't let anyone touch. Once, I tried to dust around it, and he snapped, "Leave that, Margaret, please." I had never heard his voice like that. I apologized and stepped away. That was the moment I realized there were things I wasn't meant to know. During those final months, I cared for him the best I could. I fed him, helped him bathe, and sat with him when the pain became too much. He rarely spoke, but sometimes I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Sadness, confusion, maybe even anger. I told myself it was the medication, but a part of me feared something deeper. When he passed, I mourned not just the man he was, but the years we lost to silence. I thought the funeral would bring closure, a chance to honor him, to finally rest. Instead, that letter turned it into a nightmare. And the strangest part was, the handwriting was mine. Every curve, every stroke looked identical. As the hours passed after the funeral, one question refused to leave my mind. Who would do this? And why now? When I looked back at Sophie's cold, calculating eyes, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. The letter wasn't meant for my husband. It was meant to destroy me. The night after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter. Daniel had brought it home from the church, still folded neatly in its envelope. I couldn't bring myself to open it again, but I didn't need to. Every word was already burned into my mind. I could still hear the priest's voice as he read it. Words that painted me as a liar, a woman who had deceived her dying husband, someone begging forgiveness for things I never did. The signature at the bottom was mine, not similar, not close. Mine. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the paper. Every curve of the letters, every flourish of the M in Margaret. It was perfect. I knew my own handwriting better than anyone, and this was no imitation. It was as if I had written it myself, only I hadn't. I called Daniel into the kitchen. Son, you were there. You saw the letter. You know I didn't write it. He hesitated. His voice was calm, but it carried doubt. Mom, I want to believe you. I do. But the signature, it's identical. Maybe you wrote it a long time ago and forgot. Maybe Dad kept it. Daniel, I said, my voice firm now. I didn't forget anything. I never wrote that letter. Your father and I had our differences, but I never betrayed him. Never. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Sophie said she found it while helping Dad sort through his things last month. She said he told her it was a private letter between you two. I froze. Sophie found it? He nodded. Yes. She said Dad asked her to make sure it got to the priest. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Sophie had been in charge of organizing the funeral. She handled the calls, the arrangements, the paperwork. I had been too lost in grief to question anything, but now, all the pieces started to fall into place. After Daniel went upstairs, I sat there for a long time. Every sound in the house, the creak of the old refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, felt loud and sharp. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every strange thing Sophie had said over the last few weeks. A few days before the funeral, she had stopped me in the hallway. Thomas wanted to be honest, you know, she'd said, her tone almost casual. He hated secrets. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation, but now it sounded like a warning. The next morning, I called Sophie and asked to meet. She agreed too quickly. When she arrived, she was perfectly composed, hair pinned neatly, face expressionless, like nothing had happened. She sat across from me at the table and folded her hands. I need to ask you something, I said quietly. Where did you find that letter? In the study, she answered smoothly. Your husband showed it to me. He said it was from you, written years ago, but he'd never had the courage to open it until recently. I watched her carefully. And you never thought to ask me about it? Her lips curved into a small, practiced smile. I didn't think you'd want to talk about it, Margaret. Some things are better left between husband and wife. She was lying. I could feel it in the calmness of her voice. Sophie, I said, leaning forward, I know I didn't write that letter. You know I didn't. Why would you do this? Her eyes flickered for a moment, the first crack in her perfect composure. Then she laughed softly. Do you really think everyone believes you? They heard the letter. They saw your signature. You can deny it all you want, but the truth is, no one ever really knew what went on between you two. Maybe Thomas wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. Maybe you weren't either. Her words hit like a slap. Before I could respond, she stood up, smoothing her skirt. You should let this go. Dwelling on the past won't change it. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. I watched her leave my house with that same quiet arrogance, and in that moment, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let her win. Over the next few days, I started searching for answers. I went through Thomas's belongings, every drawer, every file, every notebook in his study. I found old bank statements, photographs, and receipts, but nothing out of place, until I reached the bottom drawer of his desk. There, tucked beneath a pile of letters, I found something strange. A page torn from my old stationery set. My name was written on it in perfect cursive. It wasn't a letter, just my signature. Dozens of copies of it, written over and over, as if someone had been practicing. My breath caught in my throat. Someone had forged my handwriting, and I already knew who. I picked up one of the pages and held it against the letter from the funeral. The ink was slightly different, newer, but the strokes were identical. It was Sophie. She had done this. I didn't know how or why, but she had planted that letter to make me look guilty, to stain my name in front of everyone. And judging by the way she smirked in that church, it had worked perfectly. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection. I saw a woman who had spent her life building a family, only to have it ripped apart by lies. But I wasn't done yet. Sophie wanted to expose me. Now it was my turn to expose her. After that night, I couldn't think about anything else. Every time I tried to rest, my mind replayed Sophie's smug face at the funeral, the way she'd spoken to me like I was some delusional old woman who'd lost her memory. But I hadn't. I knew what I'd written and what I hadn't. I knew that letter was a lie, and if she had gone that far to forge my handwriting, there had to be more she was hiding. For days, I went through every inch of Thomas's study. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, that woodsy scent that used to comfort me. Now, it only made my stomach twist. His desk drawers were stacked with papers, medical bills, old letters, army documents. I found his pocket watch, the one I'd given him on our 20th anniversary. For a moment, I just stood there, holding it, wondering when he stopped trusting me. Then, in the bottom drawer, under a stack of insurance forms, I found the small wooden box he'd always guarded. The lock had been broken after his death, but no one had bothered to look inside it since the funeral. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there were letters tied with a ribbon, some yellowed with age, some newer. Beneath them was a leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with Thomas's handwriting, neat and deliberate at first, but gradually growing messier, shakier. The early entries were simple: memories, reflections about our life together, stories about Daniel as a child. But as I kept reading, the tone began to shift. He started mentioning things I didn't understand, words like deception, betrayal, and forgiveness. He wrote about a letter he'd received that proved everything. My chest tightened as I turned the pages. Whoever had given him that letter had convinced him that I had been unfaithful decades ago, that Daniel might not even be his son. Tears blurred my vision. It was clear someone had poisoned his mind against me during his final months. I flipped further, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The handwriting changed. The words were still in Thomas's journal, but the script was smoother, more elegant, and not his. I recognized it instantly. It was Sophie's. Her entries started with sentences like, "He deserves the truth," and "She'll never tell him what she did." Then they grew darker. "He believes me now. He said he couldn't look at her the same way again. He'll never know it was me." I froze. The entries weren't written for Thomas to read. They were written for her. They were confessions, pieces of her manipulation. The last entry chilled me to my core. He trusts me completely now. When the time comes, I'll make sure her lies are known to everyone. She'll lose everything she's ever loved. I sat there, unable to. My daughter-in-law had spent months feeding lies to my dying husband, twisting his pain into suspicion. She had written that forged letter, signed my name, and made sure it would be read publicly, to humiliate me, to destroy my reputation even after his death. I didn't understand why. What could I have possibly done to deserve that kind of cruelty? Then I remembered how things had changed after Daniel's promotion. He'd started earning more, and Thomas had mentioned updating the will. Sophie had insisted on helping him manage his paperwork. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't about revenge or jealousy. It was about money, control. If she could make Thomas believe I was untrustworthy, she could manipulate what happened after his death. And she had succeeded. I closed the journal slowly and sat back in the chair, my mind racing. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, but something inside me said no. If I acted too quickly, she'd find a way to twist it. She'd already fooled everyone once. I needed proof that no one could deny. I decided to make copies of the journal pages. I spent hours carefully photographing every entry, making sure the dates, handwriting, and ink color were clear. Then, I placed the originals back where I found them. She couldn't know that I knew. Not yet. That evening, when Daniel stopped by, I asked him to sit with me. I told him gently that I had found his father's journal. His face softened. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't read that stuff. Dad wasn't himself near the end." "He wasn't," I said quietly. "But someone made sure of that." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sophie," I said. "She wrote in his journal. She forged my signature. She made him believe things that weren't true." He looked at me like he didn't know what to believe. "That's a big accusation, Mom." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to see for yourself." I handed him my phone with the photos. He scrolled through them, slowly at first, then faster. His face went pale. This is her handwriting." I nodded. "She used my stationery, my pens, even my old letters to copy my signature. And when your father died, she used it to destroy my name." He sat in silence for a long moment. I could see the war inside him, the love for his wife clashing with the truth he couldn't ignore. Finally, he said, "We need to show this to everyone. They need to know what she did." "No," I said softly. "Not yet. If we expose her now, she'll deny everything. We'll let her think she's won, and then we'll let her expose herself." For the first time since the funeral, I felt a sense of strength return. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman who had been wronged, and who finally had the truth on her side. That night, I looked at Thomas's photo on the mantel and whispered, "You may have doubted me, but you're going to know the truth, my love, and everyone else will too." A week later, I called for a family gathering. I told Daniel and Sophie that I wanted to go over Thomas's estate and discuss some matters regarding the house. I made sure my tone was calm and my voice steady. I didn't want her to suspect anything. I spent the morning setting the table with coffee, tea, and the old china Thomas had loved. The house was quiet, filled with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I hadn't felt nervous like this since my wedding day. Only this time, it wasn't love I was walking into. It was war. When they arrived, Sophie was dressed as if she were attending a business meeting. Crisp white blouse, her hair pinned tightly. She greeted me with that same practiced smile, the kind that never reached. Her eyes. Daniel followed her, carrying a folder of documents, and looking like a man caught in the middle of something he didn't fully understand. We sat at the table together, and for a while, it was polite conversation, the kind that covers unease like a thin sheet over a wound. I poured coffee, keeping my hands from shaking, and waited for the right moment. Finally, I said, "Before we start, there's something I'd like to share. It's about your father." Sophie's eyes flickered briefly, her lips tightening. "Oh? What about him?" I reached into my bag and placed the worn leather journal on the table. "His journal," I said simply. "I found it in his study. I thought you both should see it." Daniel leaned forward, his expression wary but curious. Sophie barely moved. I opened the book to the last section, where the handwriting changed, from my husband's to hers. "I started reading it," I said quietly, "and at first, I thought your father had written things I didn't understand. But then I realized the words weren't his. The handwriting wasn't his. The anger, the accusations, they weren't his voice. They belonged to someone else." Sophie crossed her arms. "Margaret, I really don't think this is the time for another dramatic story. Dad's gone. You can't change what happened." I ignored her and slid the journal toward Daniel. "Look for yourself. These last pages aren't his. They're yours, Sophie." Her face paled, just slightly. "Excuse me?" Daniel frowned as he compared the entries, flipping through the pages. The handwriting, it does look different. Sophie laughed nervously. Oh, come on. You think I wrote in his journal? That's ridiculous. I stayed calm, my voice steady. You didn't just write in it. You used my old stationery, practiced my signature, and forged that letter the priest read at the funeral. You wanted to make me look guilty. You wanted everyone to believe I'd lied to my husband before he died. Her composure cracked for the first time. You can't prove that. I smiled faintly and opened my phone, placing it on the table. Actually, I can. On the screen were photographs. Clear, time-stamped images of every forged page, every fake letter, every word she had written. I took pictures before I touched anything, I said. I've already sent copies to Father Williams and to your father's attorney. If you want, I can call them right now. The color drained from her face. She turned to Daniel, trying to recover. Daniel, please. She's confused. She's trying to blame me for her own mistakes. You know how she's been since the funeral. You said yourself she's not been thinking clearly. Daniel's voice was quiet, but firm. That's enough, Sophie. She froze. He looked down at the journal again, then back at her. This is your handwriting. You forged that letter, didn't you? You made my father believe. Mom betrayed him. I did it for you, she burst out suddenly, her calm mask shattering. You don't understand. He was going to leave everything to her. You and I would have been left with nothing. I just wanted him to see the truth, to realize she wasn't some saint. Her words hung in the air, ugly and raw. Daniel pushed his chair back, shaking his head. You destroyed my father's peace in his final days for money? You humiliated my mother at his funeral for this? Sophie's eyes filled with tears, not the kind born of remorse, but of exposure. I didn't think it would go that far, she whispered. I just wanted him to doubt her, that's all. You ruined everything, Daniel said, his voice trembling. You took a dying man and filled his head with lies. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I think you should go, he said. Sophie looked at me then, her expression cold again, but weaker. You think this fixes everything? She hissed. You'll still be the woman everyone doubted. You'll never erase that. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. No, Sophie, I don't need to erase it. The truth is enough. She stood, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The echo of it filled the house, then faded into silence. Daniel sat back down, his eyes wet. Mom, I don't even know what to say. I reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know the truth. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry I doubted you. I smiled faintly. You didn't. You just needed proof. And now we both have it. We sat there quietly for a long time, the morning light spilling across the table, the journal lying open between us like a wound finally beginning to heal. In that moment, I realized something important. Sophie hadn't just wanted to hurt me. She had wanted to erase me, to make me invisible in my own family's story. But the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way back. When Daniel left that afternoon, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. As I watched him drive away, I felt lighter, like a burden I'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. That night, I stood by the window, looking at the sky. For the first time since Thomas's death, I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for peace. Because in the end, that was what he and I both deserved. The house felt different after that day. The silence that once pressed on my chest now felt peaceful. For weeks after the confrontation, I found myself walking from room to room, touching old photographs, rearranging the flowers on the mantel, trying to reclaim my home from the shadow Sophie had cast. She had tried to turn my husband's final goodbye into a weapon, and for a while, she succeeded. But now, the truth had stripped her of power. Daniel stopped by almost every evening after work. He'd bring groceries or help fix something around the house, small gestures that carried the weight of an apology he didn't know how to say. I didn't blame him for doubting me. Sophie had been clever, patient, and cruel. She had woven her lies so tightly that even love struggled to see through them. What mattered now was that he did see. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Daniel asked softly, Mom, how do you forgive something like that? I thought for a moment before answering. You don't do it for them. You do it for yourself. Carrying anger keeps you tied to the pain. Letting it go means you get to live again. He nodded slowly, like he understood. But forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. Some days, I'd wake up still angry, not just at Sophie, but at Thomas too. Angry that he believed lies about me. Angry that he left this mess behind. I had loved him for more than 40 years. I deserved better than suspicion and silence. But grief changes people, and I suppose dying does too. Maybe he just wanted to believe there was meaning behind his pain, and she gave him one. About a month after the confrontation, I went back to the church. The priest, Father Williams, greeted me with a kind smile. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, "I've been meaning to speak with you. I read the pages you sent. I'm so sorry for what you've gone through." "It's all right," I replied quietly. "The truth has a strange way of taking its time." He led me to the small garden behind the chapel where Thomas's ashes were buried. The roses were in full bloom, soft pink petals glistening in the afternoon sun. I knelt down beside the stone that bore his name. I had brought something with me that day, a letter of my own. Not one written in anger or defense, but in truth, my handwriting, my words, my heart. I unfolded the paper and began to read softly. "Thomas, you were the love of my life. I wish I could tell you how much it hurt to know you doubted me, but I understand now that you were a man scared of leaving things unfinished. You needed answers, even if they were the wrong ones. So I forgive you, my love, and I hope wherever you are, you finally see the truth. I never betrayed you. I never stopped loving you." My voice wavered, but I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange calm, as if the wind itself carried my words somewhere he could finally hear them. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it beneath a white rose, pressing the soil gently over it. When I stood, Father Williams said softly, "He knows, Margaret. I believe he knows." That night, I slept better than I had in months. No dreams, no restless turning, just peace. Sophie, on the other hand, did not disappear quietly. Within a few weeks, word had spread through the family and the community about what she had done. Daniel had filed for divorce, unable to forgive her deception. She moved out of town soon after, taking only what was hers, and leaving behind a silence that no one missed. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, only sadness for the woman she chose to become. When you live your life built on lies, truth doesn't just destroy you, it erases you. In time, Daniel began to heal. He visited more often, bringing my grandchildren on weekends. Their laughter filled the house again. They'd run through the hallways, play in the garden Thomas once tended, and ask about the grandpa they never met. I'd tell them stories of the man he used to be, the kind father who built them a swing from an old oak branch, not the one lost to whispers and deceit. Every Sunday morning, I played the piano again, the same song Thomas used to hum in the evenings when life was simple and we were young. The sound filled the house with warmth, soft and familiar. It reminded me that even though time changes everything, love, real love, never truly disappears. One afternoon, while sitting by the window, I thought about writing another letter. Not to Thomas this time, but to myself. A reminder that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs patience. I wrote, "I survived lies. I survived loss. And I found peace again. I am still here." I placed that letter inside the same wooden box that once held Thomas's secrets. But this time, it wasn't locked away in fear. It was placed there as a testament to survival. As weeks turned into months, I learned to live again. I started volunteering at the local library, teaching children how to read, their laughter, their innocence. It reminded me of everything worth protecting. I began planting roses in the garden, one for every decade Thomas and I spent together. The last one bloomed brighter than all the rest, as if even nature understood forgiveness. Now, when people talk about my husband's funeral, they don't whisper about the forged letter anymore. They talk about how truth won in the end, how love, quiet, unwavering, honest love, survived every lie meant to destroy it. And as for me, I've learned something simple but powerful. You can't control what people say about you, but you can control what you choose to believe about yourself. So if you're watching this, remember, truth has a way of finding its way home, no matter how long it takes. And if this story touched your heart, Make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because sometimes sharing a story isn't just about remembering the pain, it's about celebrating the peace that comes after it.